Welcome, everyone.
Recording.
Thank you. And good evening, everyone. This is Coach Carla Joy and friends welcoming you to Doctor's Orders, where we share information about health that pertains to you and your healthy living journey. Well, usually we have our hostess with the mostest, Ruth Presley, and wherever she is, let's send her some love. Okay, so thanks for joining us this evening. For those of you who don't know us, we are part of a community of people who are committed to inspiring healthy living around the world. We're part of the Juice Plus community, where quality products, fruits, vegetables, and berries are grown in pristine conditions, and they are picked at the peak of ripeness, washed and flash frozen and concentrated into capsules, soft chews, our complete shake, our perform shake, our omega capsule blend, and now, of course, our luminate and superfoods. Now, we usually tell you a little bit about the history of the company that started in 1970, where Jane Martin tried to create a company that would empower people to reach and fulfill their own goals and dreams and create a sustainable company where we could empower ourselves by empowering and helping other people. And we're here today to do just that. Today, we're going to talk about stomach cancer. Now, I know that might not have been the top of your list, but for many of us, this is something that we've heard about, we care about a lot, and we actually want to know more about because we've had people who've had to deal with this condition. So before we jump into it, my name is Coach Carla Joy. I am a medically trained health and life coach and a pro coach master, which means that not only do I have the education and the information about how our bodies function, I also understand how to find information about what we can do to make a difference in our lives today. Now, my story didn't start all sunshine and roses. Actually, I had suffered for many years with skin conditions, muscle and bone conditions, and feminine problems that spanned decades. And so I thought that a medical education would help me find solutions. I didn't realize that there was more to the situation than just education. And I went on a journey after I discovered that instead of being the healthiest person I knew, I was actually becoming a statistic. So I went on a journey to try to discover how I could be healthy, how I could do the unimaginable, because I had never seen anybody come back from high blood pressure, high cholesterol, and pre-diabetes. In fact, my whole family background is where people had died from heart disease, cancer, complications of diabetes type 1 and type 2, complications of autoimmune conditions. Now, if you look at the CDC's list of 15 most common causes of death and disability in the United States, I kind of had the corner on the genetic market, and I had never seen people recover. So I was asking and praying for something I had never seen. I was praying to be healed. So I went on a journey to see if there was information out there. I followed my friend Ruth Presley, learned some of the things that she was doing to support her own health journey. And I wasn't sure it was working until my goddaughter introduced me to the documentaries Forks Over Knives and Dr. Michael Greger's presentation on uprooting the causes of disease. I suddenly realized, number one, that there was hope. Because in his presentation, Dr. Greger said that by changing certain aspects of your lifestyle, you could reduce the risk. And he was showing the scientific data for this, slow the progress of, and he gave us examples, and in some cases, even reverse the manifestations of these illnesses, not just removing symptoms, but actually changing the course of the health. And in the documentary Forks Over Knives, we saw people's lives being transformed. So I realized that I had to make a change. I had to do something different, and that there were people who were already doing different things. And I started on my healthy living journey. I made the changes. I started looking at the 6 pillars of health because someone introduced me to how I could add more fruits and vegetables through the concentrated fruits and vegetables from the Juice Plus company. I started adding them, and within a year of adding them and making certain lifestyle changes, I got a clean bill of health. Now, I'm telling you this story because I want you to know what I learned, that there is hope. And that number two, this hope is not restricted for a few, it is available to anyone. And that means you. And so, as we start our discussion today about the connection between stomach cancer and food, you can know that there are things that you can do. And we'll talk about that at the end. So, I was looking at Dr. Greger's presentation about the role of nutrition and stomach cancer. He says that, and you can find this information at nutritionfacts.org, where Dr. Michael Greger and those who work with him produce information that's based on the research. They look at all the research and then they come up with the answers and the conclusions so that you don't have to. In his presentation, he was explaining that people in Japan have the longest life expectancy, and it's been that way for a very long time. They found that their diet reduced cardiovascular disease, different forms of cancer, diabetes, and autoimmune conditions. All of those are very, very low or non existent in Japan, places like Japan. But the Japanese had the highest incidence of stomach cancer. They had 6 times more stomach cancer. Now, at one time, it was thought that it had something to do with adding talc to the rice so that they could polish it. In fact, that led to a huge lawsuit against Johnson and Johnson. But they also noticed that people who migrated from Japan to places like the United States, their stomach cancer risk and incidence went down. So right there, you're thinking, it has something to do with the different cultures. And one of the biggest thing about a culture is their food. Well, the other thing that the scientists observed was that people who had stomach cancer had a high incidence of an infection with a bug called H. pylori. Now, the CDC recognized this as a class 1 carcinogen. In other words, they are absolutely sure that H. pylori has a connection, a direct connection with the incidence of cancer. However, um, there are people with high concentrations of H. pylori in Korea and Japan, but they didn't have the same rates of cancer. Korea, Japan, and China. When they looked at people from Africa, they found that, for example, places like Nigeria, they had a higher H. pylori incidence, but they had a lower stomach cancer risk. When they looked at people from India, India had a 2 times higher infection rate with H. pylori, but they had a much, much lower stomach cancer risk. So it was obvious to the scientists that even though H. pylori, an infection with that bacteria, is connected with an increased risk of stomach cancer, it doesn't necessarily cause stomach cancer. Depending on which expert you listen to, the world is described as having half the population have an infection with H. pylori. And others say two-thirds of the world's population have H. pylori, but two-thirds of the world, or half the world, doesn't get stomach cancer. In fact, it's obvious that there may be other cofactors, that there may be other things involved. So the hypothesis was the thought that, well, maybe it's something that's being eaten by the Koreans, because we have all of these people with even higher H. pylori infections that aren't getting cancer. Maybe it's something that's being eaten in Korea. And what they looked at was preserved, salted fish and vegetables. And when they examined it, they found that fresh fish and fresh vegetables didn't have a correlation with an increase in stomach cancer. But preserved and salted and pickled fruits, vegetables, and meats, whether it's fish or animal products, had an increased cancer occurrence in Japan, even more than China, because it's also eaten in China. And what they discovered is that the Japanese ate multiple more times of these preserved, salted, and pickled fruits and vegetables than their Chinese counterparts. So that's an observational study. So they wanted to put it to the test, and they did. They found that pickled juice from pickled vegetables, when you drip it um, on cells, stomach cells, causes inflammation and leads to DNA damage. But what about in our bodies? I mean, what happens in the lab is one thing, but what happens in our bodies? So they put it to the test. They did biopsies of people's stomach before they exposed them to one group to fresh vegetables and another group to pickled vegetables. And what they found was that those who were exposed to the fresh vegetables, they had no increase or no occurrence of inflammation in the stomach. Those exposed to the pickled vegetables had severe abnormalities, which they associated with inflammation and precancerous damage. So, what about non-fermented or fermented soy products? I knew what you were thinking. So, well, so did they? They actually took a look at the effect of non-fermented or fermented soy products like tofu, edamame, soy milk. They found there was a reduced risk of stomach cancer, or in some of the experiments, there was no association with cancer at all. And so the understanding is, the realization is, that the antioxidant and anti-inflammatory isoflavonoids inside of soy products are actually helping protect the body and participate in the healing process, rather than being associated with damage, inflammation, or precancerous lesions. So now they had two pieces of information. You have an infection with H. pylori, and you have exposure to high amounts of preserved, salted, or pickled foods. But what is it? Is it the pickled vegetables, or is it the amount of salt in the fermented and pickled vegetables? So these salted preserved foods, they found maybe it's the salt. They found that when you add excessive amounts of salt, it increases either the amount of inflammation, the ease with which the bacteria could actually increase, and the increase in certain the production of certain carcinogens. Those are cancer associated or cancer causing compounds. So here now we have H. pylori, preserved, salted, pickled fruits and vegetables or meats, and the fact that the salt itself at these high concentrations increased the risk of stomach cancer. So, what are the things that we can do? Well, we can try to eradicate the H. pylori. And there are medications, there's a cocktail of antibiotics that are used to try to eliminate H. pylori, and your doctor can give you more information about that. But there's usually a lot of medications involved, side effects, and of course, a lot, because it's a lot of medications, the um, adhering to the protocol is not always 100%. But these drugs are effective. They're about 95% effective in eradicating H. pylori. However, keep in mind that H. pylori is spread through dirty water, exposure to stool, exposure to intimate contact, not what hand washing. So if you are living in a household with people who have an H. pylori, um, they're positive H. pylori, the likelihood that sharing glasses, drinking out of the same cup, and things like that could result in other members of the family also having that infection. Well, what about foods? Is it possible to change our diet and result in a lower risk of H. pylori? I'm glad you asked, because it is. Changing the foods and using the the broccoli family vegetables, then you can get as much as 56% reduction or elimination of H. pylori. So it's not as effective as the bacteria, but especially for people, it's not as effective as the antibiotics, but for people who are not able to take the antibiotics for whatever reason, then changing your diet can radically reduce the exposure to H. pylori. So, why does this work? Well, when you have salt and pickled fresh vegetables or other animal products, then it creates a compound, CMBA. I think that's chloromethylthiobutyric acid. It's a mutagen. It's a compound that causes mutation of your DNA. Salt plus nitrile preservatives plus an amino acid that's found in animal products called methionine lead to this creation of CMBA and other nitroso compounds that cause mutations in the cells, which leads to stomach cancer. So it means that things like bacon, ham, sausage, lunch meats, deli meats, they all increase the cancer risk. They have those amino acids, the methionine, they contain the nitrile preservatives, and they have a lot of salt. So all put together, they actually contribute to an increased risk of stomach cancer. So based on the research, H. pylori plus diet leads to an increased risk of cancer. We already mentioned how to remove the H. pylori through prescription antibiotics and the foods, the broccoli family, because they contain a compound called sulforaphane. So all of these cruciferous vegetables, broccoli, cabbage, kale, they all contain compounds that actually help reduce the incidence and the severity of H. pylori infection and reduce our risk of stomach cancer. They even did research on broccoli sprouts, and they found that it works in a petri dish in the lab, but they also found that 1/3 of a cup of broccoli sprouts a day for about a week actually reduced H. pylori and the severity of the infections. There were many, many studies done, and so you can reduce the incidence of stomach cancer by adding cruciferous vegetables. They actually put it to the test, and they found that using fresh fruits and vegetables, especially the cruciferous vegetables, actually resulted in a reduction in cancer. So, and things like onion and the garlic family were also put to the test. And they found that that reduced the risk of stomach cancer, except in people who drank alcohol. So, what are the final takeaways? I know I gave you a lot of information, but that's how Dr. Greger is. He has a lot of information. He pulls it from the most reliable research and they present it. They're not afraid of discovering that things that might be controversial for us, but they want to give us the information because if you have the right information, you can make a better decision. So, final takeaways. Whole food plant-based eating reduce the risk, slow the progress of cardiovascular disease, cancer, diabetes, and autoimmune conditions. In some cultures where there are large amount of salted, preserved, and pickled vegetables that cause an increase in stomach cancer risk, if you cut back on the salted, preserved, and pickled fruits and vegetables, and if you add fresh vegetables from the broccoli family, then you can, and the garlic and onion family, you can actually reduce your risk of getting stomach cancer. H. pylori is implicated, but it's not on its own. It has to have a combination of the H. pylori infection plus the salted, preserved, and pickled foods, plus the high concentration of salt. So, what do you do? I'm glad you asked. You could consider switching to a whole food, plant based eating plan. Well, and we're here to help you. At the Juice Plus Company, we offer you concentrated fruits, vegetables, and berries. As I mentioned at the beginning, they're prepared, they're grown in pristine conditions. They are not picked until they're fully ripe, so they have the highest concentration of the nutrients when they're picked, and they are flash frozen and concentrated into powders and placed in capsules. We also have the complete shake where you get access to plant-based proteins along with other vegetables that have been grown and treated in the same high quality way. And the complete shake and the perform shake are actually used by Olympic athletes. We actually have the Luminate, which is acting as a calmative and also helping to focus and to provide energy for our daily tasks. And now we have the superfood, where you have the contents of the fruit, vegetable, and berry capsules placed in a sleeve. You put it in water, shake it, or blend it, and you have access to the 30 fruits, vegetables, and berries in the superfood. Now, you may be asking, okay, it sounds great. I'm ready. How can you get access to this? I'm very glad you asked. The person who invited you to this video presentation, they can help you. Reach out to them and they'll show you how you can get connected where you can purchase your own. We also provide free consultations on a three-way call or a three-way Zoom so that we can hear what your situation is. I mean, we all have our heads up here and our legs down there, but each of us is in a different place in our healthy living journey. And so, what you need to do next, we can help you make the next best step. We also invite you to consider 5 free sessions of one-on-one coaching with an experienced health coach so that you can actually spend more time not just understanding what's your best pathway. We can create like a GPS map for your journey, but we can also provide unparalleled support and proactive accountability so that you can jumpstart your journey. And as a bonus, we're now preparing for our 25-day reset starting in October. This you can join in our free Facebook group so that you can take this journey, but you're not taking it alone. So you can put if you're interested in hearing more information, you can put me in the chat and chat with Charlotte, and she will take your phone information so we can text you, or your email so that we can email you. Or you can text me at 202-468-4003. Well, with that information, I hope you have enough information to know, number one, that there is hope. That if you know someone who has a diagnosis of stomach cancer, or you know someone who's been experiencing digestive issues for years. I suffered with digestive issues for years, not realizing that there were things that I could do differently. If you have friends or loved ones who are suffering, or who about whom you are concerned, there's hope. So connect with us and we'll help them on their healthy living journey. I hope that this has been helpful for you. And my friends are here today, and I hope they'll unmute, because we're here every Friday night where we say,
Eat
eat
more
more
fruits
fruits
and
and
vegetables.
vegetables. That's right. Eat more fruits and vegetables. This is Coach Carla Joy saying thanks for joining us this time. And we can't wait to see you next time.